Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. I think I want to thank Joe Mulholland for inviting me. I'm not sure that I'll agree with you at the end of it, but however, when I was trying to put my thoughts together about what I might say earlier on today when I was out in Udaross na Gaeltacht and with Armagee and so on, a few groups, as Michael, you well know, they lined up to meet me as soon as I got off the plane last night. And there's another confession session this afternoon. But seriously though, I think it's for nothing that the founders of the modern Irish state use terms like Oireachtas, Seanad and Dáil when they were talking about what the Assembly representing the people ought to be about. And I think maybe rather than spending our time talking about whether we have enough, too few or too many representatives of the people in the Dáil, we might just try and tease out what it is we think our Parliament is at the moment. I think we know what the government does, we know what the President does, and we think that we want the Parliament to hold the government to account and legislate. But where do we draw the pool of people's representatives from? Now, the founders of the state certainly came from the bar, the medical profession, the teaching profession, and a fairly eclectic bunch of people, mainly male, nearly all male. And they came together, I think, to try and look at ways of interpreting the views of the Irish people and to develop a way for a new republic. And I think that they thought about issues like, or models like, the assemblies in Tara long ago, the Confederation of Kilkenny, the post and the pre-United Ireland Parliament, and so on. But I think that wherever and whatever has been done in the meantime, there seems to me to be a significant disconnect between Parliament and a great number of people whom we claim to represent. Part of my responsibility, a big part of my responsibility, is looking after or enabling or empowering the community sector in this country. And I think, as well as looking at what is the role of our Parliament, our Dáil, I think we should look as well at how reflective is that Parliament of all sectors of the Irish community. And I would say to you that there is a very significant number of Irish people who are in no way reflected in the Parliament that we have at the moment. By the last count, there is something between 23 and 25,000 NGOs in this country, some of them very small, some of them very significant, some of them very powerful, some able to lobby, some not. But in my experience, a great number of those organisations have no way of making sure that their voices are heard. Now, certainly, in better local government and so on, that Michael McLoone and others would have been involved in drawing up, did make attempts to try and get a more participatory democratic system, parliamentary system put in place. But I can tell you that the McCarthy report and a report to be, I don't know whether it's to be published tomorrow or when it's to be published, on local government structures and so on, there really is a mission abroad to cut down on those numbers, to make them less influential, and to strip away many of the structures that exist for them to hear their voice. And if it weren't for organisations like, say, Just in Ballymun and the Jesuit Centre for Peace and Justice, who are involved in trying to train people to get their voices heard at local level, I doubt very much, if very much at all, would happen. And if we go down that road, I think there is no doubt about it that the Irish Parliament will continue to be the preserve of the elite few who come from the teaching profession, from the bar, and a small number from business. But let's call them the ordinary person is finding it damn difficult to make their way through the parliamentary process. There are very few of them who manage to get through town councils, local councils, and certainly they're not exactly reflected in the membership of any political party. And those few who do make it through, and they're small in number, very often they don't find that it's a nice place to be, or they don't last very long in it. So I think that's at least as big a challenge for us as anything else. And I certainly think that until such time as we have the courage, all parties, to bring in everybody, as far as we possibly can, to engagement with the people, with the process of power making and legislation enforcement, we are not going to go anywhere. Now, look, you can say you're not doing very much about it. I think, warts and all, you could look at, for example, the Convention on the Future of Europe as an exercise where a wide range of people, admittedly across a greater population base, were able to come together and over a period of time were able to think out what they felt the Europe that they would want to be part of could be implemented. And I think it's a great pity that that particular exercise was stripped down, was diminished, and it's for another day as to whether we're going to be able to get involved in things like citizens' assemblies and so on. We could look at many other models, but certainly what we have at the moment isn't fit for purpose here in Ireland. I suppose I speak as somebody who came up through, as Michael McLoone has said, through the local government system, but I came into politics both by accident and late in life. I regard myself as a bit like the Martin Bell of Irish politics, in that I got there quite by accident. I think the only party, with the greatest respect to everybody present, that I never voted for was Fine Gael. And when I formally got involved in politics around 1980 or thereabouts, I'd been through community politics, through local activism and so on, and I felt that it was possible to make some change. And then I did get involved in the local authority system, in the VEC system, and so on. And to be honest with you, that's probably where I got the greatest pleasure out of being involved in the VECs, DIT, and so on. Then, at the ripe old age of 50, I managed to get elected at the third attempt to Dáil Éireann. It was a huge privilege. It is a huge privilege, there's no doubt about that. But I was just talking to Maurice Manning last night about my take on the people who are elected by Irish people to get involved in Parliament. And it just strikes me there are two types. There's one, the very young, energetic, the Leo Varadkars, the Brian Hayeses and so on of this world, who want to change the world tomorrow. And then, they've been there before, by the way. They make a great contribution. They come into a system that they find difficult to cope with, and they talk themselves out of it. And then they maybe get appointed as judges or something like that. And there's a second type. People like myself, who came in late in life, maybe as a second career, and maybe, just maybe, have the greater personal security to be able to take, without being big-headed about it, the wiser decisions, who don't get too exercised about whether they're going to get elected next time round or not. Of course I want to get elected next time round. Louis O'Flaherty down there is one of my constituents who's going to make sure I won't. I'm probably making sure myself that I won't get elected next time round. But when I look at people of the maturity of, for example, Pat Rabbitte, Rory Quinn, Michael Noonan, Mary Harney, Mary O'Rourke, I would have thought, I would say, and I'd say very strongly, that they're the people who probably are making the wisest and the strongest contribution to our parliamentary system, to our democracy at the moment, because they have the security, they have the wisdom, they have the experience of being around an awfully long time. So, is it about numbers? I don't think it is, quite honestly. I don't think it matters a great deal whether it's 166 or 26. I think it is what we want the Parliament to do that's most important. Now, I spent nearly 2 years in the office of Chief Whip, and having come in and spent my time on the back benches in the various committees and so on. And, you know, learning by doing and not being too anxious to put my head above the parapet, but learning, as I said, how the system works. Moved into the Whip's office and then looked at how the system is as rusty, maybe even dysfunctional as it is. There are lots of people before me who were there. The late Seamus Brennan, Noel Dempsey was here this week, and others indeed, from other parties, Sean Barrett from Fine Gael, have tried their best to try and tweak the system as best they can. And yes, there have been changes, there have been improvements. So the reforming the parliamentary system, at least one part of it, and the one I want to talk about a bit, is making the House more relevant, more efficient in carrying out its business. And it can do that. But it needs a greater degree of agreement for that to happen, for anything significant to take place. The big breakthrough a number of years ago was leaders' questions, where the Taoiseach of the day takes questions from, unannounced questions from the opposition leaders. But can I say this much to you? I've discovered that the leaders' questions is a very staid affair. It's dictated, the contents of leaders' questions, by and large, is now dictated, dare I say it, some of them are here, by the colour writers of the morning papers, by the agenda of the two main news programmes on RT and on News Talk. And I even see experienced politicians looking up and winking up at the gallery when they think they have made a hit which is likely to make the 1 o'clock news or the Pat Kenny programme or whatever it is. And I think it is a great pity that that is the approach that is being taken. That's the way it has developed. But can I let you into a little secret? One of my jobs, and I presume every Chief Whip does it, was to try and anticipate what the others are likely to ask. And can I say, the success rate is damn close to about 95%. Rarely enough will something come up that has never been anticipated. That's why I carried that god-awful black folder everywhere, which has the few replies to it. I know Lisa and Miriam and so on know all that already. So that's the leaders' questions issue. I think, by the way, that has greater potential. I really do. And I don't want to be facetious about it at all. It was an extremely significant breakthrough, but I honestly think it needs to be worked on. And I'm looking down at people like Frank Flannery down there, and he says, well, why the hell don't you have one on Thursdays as well? It's a damn good point. Because whatever has happened to a Thursday, it has become a circus and an even greater charade around the order of business. You know, no serious work any longer gets done on a Thursday. Now, to get back to, I suppose, the timetable of the Dáil per day. Taoiseach's questions, for example, where the Taoiseach is taken to account by the opposition leaders. Very often, the questions relate to events that happened 6 to 9 months previously. Now, that's hardly a relevant parliament when you're talking about questions as archaic as that. I mean, I put forward the proposal that, and I think it has got broad agreement, that a number of things would happen. We don't need to have Taoiseach's questions as often as they are at the moment. We could have them much more relevant than they are, and engaging in important questions. For example, if the Dáil were sitting at the moment, we should be talking about the questions that apply at the moment, not who the Taoiseach met when he was at the European Council meeting last May or last April, whatever it was. So issues like that need to be addressed and can be addressed. And then the other questions that we all want to put down to the Taoiseach, there can be written replies made to those. Then we come to leaders' questions, as I said. A fairly potentially energising and important focus for the public. After all, it is broadcast on a Wednesday, broadcast live. It is a significant piece of public debate. It could be a lot more significant if a lot more effort were made to make sure that there is real engagement in relation to it. Then you have the order of business. And we have made proposals, Emmett Stagg, David Staunton, myself, Kieran Cuff, Angus O'Snuddy, who were whips at the time. We all, as a group, said, these are great ideas. We certainly need to have the order of business much snappier. The whip, for example, could take a lot more of it. The legislative programme is not a mystery. It could be up there, and the status of it could be up on the web. Absolutely no difficulty about that. And make it snappier, easier to do, easier to access, and so on. And then there would be a lot more time for, guess what, for ordinary debate about the legislation programme of the government. There are some days, by the way, where the amount of time devoted to legislation is as short as 3/4 of an hour. And by the way, this isn't about whether the Dáil should sit longer, should sit on Mondays and Fridays or not. This is about doing our business more efficiently. It is a sad reality that very little time is devoted to serious scrutiny of legislation. It's even a sadder reality that when we come to second stage debates, you have opening speeches, scripted opening speeches, which I think are fine for the Minister and the opposition speakers. But then you have a succession of speakers coming in and reading, as I'm afraid I have seen, the explanatory memorandum of a bill being read into the record as an original speech. And something as relevant as how this piece of legislation applies to the member's own constituency. So I would say there isn't any need for the 20-minute slots, which I spent my life just checking, make sure who's done their 20 minutes, can we break it up, can we put in more people. There is no need to do that, I honestly believe. What we do need to do, though, we ought to be able to have people, members, come into the chamber and take their chances. They do it in the House of Commons, they do it in the Canadian Parliament, and be called upon, the Count Corla or whoever is in the chair, would simply, when somebody indicates, they do it in the European Parliament, they do it everywhere. Why the hell can't we do it? And you're given your 2 or 3 minutes to make your point, and you would have engagement and interaction. One of the very, very big negatives, I think, in the Dáil as it operates at the moment, is that people they sit down. There might be 2 or 3 people in the chamber, but they're hardly listening to each other because there's no need to listen to each other. Very few people take a point of order. They should do it. Few people take a point of information. They should do it. And people just come in when they're expected to come in. The opposition whips do it. Government whips do it. And it's entirely ineffective. And I think it gives the whole process a bad name. And I think that should be done much more readily. It could be done in the morning, quite honestly, if there was cross-party agreement for it. And I would put it down as a challenge that whatever government is there, they're always trying to see, if I allow Thursday as leaders' questions, what do I get in return? People are balancing what loss, what gain there is. I think it's a great pity that we reduce to that. So the idea of greater engagement, and again to come back to the people I mentioned earlier, the Mary O'Rourke's, the Pat Rabbitts, the Brian Lenahans, Michael D. Higgins, Mary Harney and so on. They're the people that I would cite as good examples. And one very good example, and I think there are some people here who sat through the debate on the NAMA bill, the all-night session. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when I saw as good an engagement as I've seen anywhere between Michael D. and Brian Lenihan on a philosophical point. Now, a number of the rest of us were wondering, what is this all about? But they knew what it was about, and they were teasing out a very, very valid point. And we need to be able to do that a lot more. And I suppose, quite honestly, those of us who are not brilliant public speakers need to have the courage to try it out too. After all, it happens in smaller assemblies, Why in the name of goodness can't it happen in ours? Another area, and I think our electors are entitled to have their issues addressed too. The Canadian Parliament, for example, doesn't have question time, as we know it, but they do have an opportunity to question ministers. I nicknamed it the Just a Minute quiz. It's one minute is given to a member to raise an issue with a minister. It could be, Minister, what in the name of God are you going to do about the leaking roof in the school up the road in my constituency? And if the Minister for Education is around, then, look, I'm going to give a grant of 75,000 or something like that, or I have no idea what you're talking about, and I'll come back to you. But if there is that opportunity for people to get involved with their ministers, articulating their issues, then you won't have the farce of somebody standing up under Standing Order 32. I doubt very much if a dozen people in the room have a clue what Standing Order 32 is about. But the Council will ritually call out that under Standing Order 32 I'm asked to blah, blah, blah. And James Bannon stands up. He always stands up on a Thursday. He's good at that. And then you'll get the James Bannons from every other party, bar the government's party, will stand up and try and raise an issue, because there is no way of raising it. I'm not just trying to make fun of James Bannon or anybody else. But if there is no other way of raising a relevant point which is important in your own constituency, you've got to try and use some rules to do that. So bringing in something where you could have 10 members on rotation every single day, raising a question and getting the minister to reply. And you can follow that up in a fortnight's time if you don't get a proper answer to it. I think that's something very simple, and it could be brought in. We've made proposals that it would. I mean, we as whips, I'm not sure what happens to it when we, well, I know what happens to it when it goes back, and I bounced it off my own people. It got a frosty enough reception, I have to tell you. We need to do that. There's another area where has potential, and that is the much derided adjournment debates. You could easily make those a lot more relevant. The adjournment debate, remember, is an opportunity for a member, usually four, to raise an issue which concerns them. It could be about the closure of a hospital. It could be about an international issue. It could be about any number of issues. But at the moment, there are 5 minutes allowed to the member to make their point, and there's 5 minutes given to the minister, by the way, any minister, to come in and make the response. What's lacking, Catherine down there will know very well, she's been through it, you have no opportunity to ask a question. There's no formal opportunity to ask a question. Bad and all as the Senate is, at least you can ask one question there and you can get an answer. Now, the least you could have is engagement on the basis of a couple of questions. What I would do, though, is in order to make it relevant, rather than putting it in the dead of night where you're talking to, as Pat Rabbit says, drunks and insomniacs, then you could at least have the debate reflected in the day's news. Absolutely no doubt about that. And that is an area that has huge potential. So there are just some of the areas where I believe that without too much effort, we could certainly make a difference. And that's only about the efficiency of the Dáil. Now, I'm not going to get involved, because other people have views on this, about the size and the duties of a TD. I'll only say this much. We are not Malta. We need to stop looking at everybody else. We need to start looking at our own community, at the needs of us as an Irish people, and see how do we develop a relevant parliamentary system which satisfied our needs. And if we do, then the issues that Michael McLoone raised earlier on, how do we deal with economic challenges, social challenges, any other challenge you like, then we will be able to do that. But I honestly believe that until such time as we decide what it is we want our demos to be, we're going to be just simply playing around. And I think that we have an opportunity to do that. I think we have an opportunity to do it reasonably quickly. And I think it would make a very, very significant difference. But I go back to the point that I made at the very beginning. I believe that as a nation, we are great participants. But if there is whatever kind of a ceiling, whether it's a glass ceiling or whatever, or a class ceiling, and I think it's more a class ceiling than a glass ceiling, quite honestly, which prevents a significant number of the population from being able to get involved in our democratic system, then no amount of tinkering around with the system is going to make a difference. Whether it's the list system or an alternative system or whatever, I venture to say this, that the referendum across the water about the alternative voting system is going to be just another exercise unless they too decide that there is a better way of conducting the parliamentary process and engaging in public debate. Because with the greatest respect, the public debate must be authored by the community and not by the quality broadsheets or the quality news programmes. It's the needs of the Irish people as Irish people that need to be reflected in both what we debate and what we legislate. Then and only then, I believe, will the government be taken into account.